Welcome to Morally Offensive, the official podcast of disappointing your Catholic family. I'm Bill.
I'm Stephanie.
And today we are excited to dig into Sergio Martino's take on an Edgar Allan Poe classic, The Black Cat. The movie is Your Vice is a Locked Room, and Only I Have the Key.
This is a podcast about the films condemned or considered morally offensive by the Catholic Church.
I used to be Catholic.
And I was raised in the Reformed Jewish tradition with mixed results.
I'm obsessed with the religion that raised me.
And I'm just here for the dirty movies.
The films we cover are selected from the official film review lists of the Legion of Decency, RIP, and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I'm a motion graphics designer, editor, and DJ.
And I produce film fests focusing on obscure 70s horror, offbeat midnight movies, and all sorts of Euro sleaze, but the good kind.
And together we are on a journey to watch every film condemned or considered morally offensive.
Morally offensive.
Stephanie, welcome back. It's been such a long time since you've been on the podcast.
It's been days, hours. It's been, but in my world, Bill, sometimes that's a lifetime.
It does feel like we were just here. But I'm very excited to be back because we're talking about a film that you actually introduced to me at a screening. I saw it for the first time in theaters, which is just a magical way to see a film for the first time like this, by one of your favorite Giallo directors from Italy, and I believe a personal acquaintance of yours, if I'm not mistaken.
You are correct on all fronts, Bill. What a treat that was to see this film properly screened in a really intimate theater with hardcore other Gialloholic weirdos, right? Just what a wonderful moment.
Oh,
and
it was so cool. It
was sublime, really. And Sergio is absolutely in my top three, maybe the red ribbon winner of them all, which is very high praise coming from the likes of me. And yes, I have met Sergio several times. And in fact, because there is something really wrong with me, I worked with the Music Box in Chicago and the American Cinematheque in Los Angeles. And we brought him to LA and Chicago for screenings and Q&As and meet and greets. And man, that probably took a few years off my life. But hey, it's Sergio Martino.
I did make it down for Torso. Did not get to meet Sergio because I believe he stuck around for a little bit. I think he was tired and didn't stick around for the whole movie. But the Q&A with him was fantastic that you led.
Thank you. It was not only an honor and pleasure to speak with him, but I have to give flowers to the co-producer and the translator of the entire event, my dear friend Alice Pistono. She really made the Q&As and brought the nuance of the language and the, sweet little tidbits of Italian gossip to wonderful life. So what a treat, though. What a wonderful moment that was to speak to Sergio about his beautiful Jolly.
Excellent. And I've heard you have some insider information we might dig into later in this episode. But first, if you listened to our episode on Stigmata, you will remember Professor Christopher Hoppe, who is here with us today. I didn't have a guest scheduled for this episode because I couldn't think of who to bring in who would want to talk about Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. And Chris immediately noticed that and said, hey, do you have a guest for that episode? Because I would love to talk some Sergio Martino with you guys. And I wasn't going to say no to that. So I brought Chris back in, and here we are. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
I'm happy to be here. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Of my own thoughts, it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party on the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast, whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up. Though ends the final words of the literary inspiration of this Giallo that we are speaking of, from the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. That is the original ending of The Black Cat.
Wow, so cool.
That's a great story. I really like that one a lot by Poe. I don't know what that says about me, but that one's always kind of haunted me in a way. I do.
I've,
I love his writing in general. He's such a great at prose.
I've
Poe
taught it
has good
to my students
prose.
many times, that actual short story, which particularly gruesome when you think of the elements that are involved with.
Oh yeah, typical of a child like me. I at the Scholastic Book Fair, I didn't pick up like some of the typical stuff, like even like Goosebumps. I mean, I wasn't allowed to have Goosebumps, I don't think, but I did grab an Edgar Allan Poe compilation when I was like 7 or 8 years old and read the whole thing, and that was in there. And yeah, this began my journey
Oh yeah.
into the world of Gothic horror. That was kind of the intro for me. So Chris, how did you come to this film?
So I come to this film because way back, late 90s, back in Chicago on Milwaukee Avenue, there was this video store that was only open on the weekends because the guy that ran it was a lawyer, and this was kind of his part-time passion. And he had, he would do, those imported versions of Italian horror films. And I would have to say probably the very first Giallo I ever watched was going to be either Argento's Deep Red, Profondo Rosso, or it would be one of my personal favorites, which would be Tenebrae. And my VHS copy of Tenebrae has Japanese subtitles. So that's the very first time I ever viewed Tenebrae was with Japanese subtitles, with the overdubbed Roma voice recording of its style. And then as the years would go on, Anchor Bay, the video company, started releasing all these, all the Bava films.
Oh yeah.
So we discover, Blood and Black Lace, which some film critics argue is our first official Giallo in the genre. And maybe we want to bring our viewers, who are probably, or listeners, not, familiar with this genre, to describing what it is and where it comes from.
It definitely is on my list of things to do, and we could tackle that right now if we want to.
So Giallo is Italian for yellow. And I was speaking with my Italian Spanish colleague just to make sure, so I got the proper pronunciation of Giallo.
Giallo.
Yellow. It's a subgenre of the horror suspense thriller, named after a series of lurid yellow paperbacks that would be sold all over Italy, with, the works of Agatha Christie and Edgar Wallace and Sherlock Holmes and Alfred Hitchcock, and all like the traditional mystery writers would be in these yellow pulp novels. And then, of course, they would have these very prepositional name titles.
Of course.
And one of the main characteristics is we always have a faceless mass killer in a black trench coat. We have amateur detectives, usually killing, beautiful models and, far off chateaus in the mountains in an agricultural site where there might be a hippie commune or something, if we're going to go with the late 60s, early 70s. Or it harkens to the Gothic tradition with, some distorted castle, with, the archetype characters that we would find there. Or it's in Rome or Milan.
I say it's a very urban genre.
It's a very urban genre, which, brings up the whole concept of, the detective story. And, usually in what's one of the greatest things that I discovered while watching these films was this concept of an amateur detective. Usually we meet the corrupt law enforcement characters, trying to pay off or blackmail, who's being accused of a murder. So, a hero or a heroine has to clear their name. But what's interesting, as I was viewing this film most recently, is how this particular Giallo plays against a lot of the atypical tropes and stereotypes that we would find in most Giallos.
It does feel more Gothic, right? It's more of like a Gothic meets Giallo crossover.
And Sadian.
Okay.
With its characters.
Well, it's also pulling from
Christopher.
another influence on this is Les Diaboliques, the Clouseau movie,
Yes.
and I assume you've both seen that or are familiar with it at least.
I got to see a 35 millimeter print at the Art Institute once.
Oh, get out of here!
Yeah, back when it was still on Columbus.
Oh, yeah.
The old film center. Yeah.
Yep. Wow.
I just introduced a screening of Les Diaboliques at the Gene Siskel Film Center, and it was one of the most thrilling and satisfying 4 minutes of my life. And it is also a stated favorite of Maestro Martino.
Giallo, I mean, let's throw out some of the big ones, right? You've got Argento with things like Deep Red, like you said, Profondo Rosso. Martino is a big one. You have Fulci, who, I think a lot of times think of Fulci and you're talking about zombie movies. But he did many movies. You actually screened The Psychic recently, Stephanie. You've got Mario Bava, who's kind of like the... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The Psychic was the first Giallo I ever screened. And absolutely, I think it's one of Fulci's best. But Bill, I'll also remind you that Lenzi was very prolific. And then there's a handful of people who kind of came in and out of making what we would now call Giallo. But I really think that...
I like Ercole a lot. Ercole is a great director.
Yes, another one, definitely. I mean, there's so many of them to list, but I think if we were doing a Giallo 101, it's Argento, Martino, Bava, Fulci, Lenzi.
I would have to agree, yes. And there's a lot of... It's interesting, too, because, again, I've talked about this before. This period in Italian cinema is very insular. You've got small groups of people all kind of crisscrossing and working with each other. So this film has a score by Bruno Nicolai, who, he was part of Ennio Morricone's group of composers. You also have Ernesto Gastaldi on this film, who is a prolific screenwriter in Italian cinema. He wrote a film that just ended up on my top 50 films of all time list, Once Upon a Time in the West. He did a ton of Giallo, frequent collaborator with Martino, but an incredible writer with an incredible filmography. It's kind of daunting how much stuff he worked on. And of course, you have a rotating cast of actors who are often working with Martino, including his muse, who I'd let you introduce, Chris.
But we'll let Stephanie say the proper pronunciation.
Of course.
Edwige Fenech.
Edwige Fenech.
Yeah.
Who is, one of those actresses you see in a movie, and it completely changes the movie. Her presence, her acting is fantastic as well, but her presence she's a movie star, is essentially what she is. And I mean, you and I were talking before this about, unfortunately, we found out today that Claudia Cardinale has passed. And I think Fenech had the same kind of star power as her. She didn't reach the same heights as Claudia. I mean, Claudia was in some American films as well, which were in huge, box office successes. And she was working with Fellini and things, but I do feel like Fenech is kind of an underrated star of this period. She has an incredible presence, great actress, and she brings a lot to the films of Martino. And I don't think she is an integral part of the Martino films that she's in. And it's funny because she wasn't in that many Giallos, but she left such an impact. She's kind of considered one of the biggest scream queens of the Giallo genre.
I would say that she's at the top when it comes to the Giallos. I know others would argue that it's Barbara Boucher, but in my opinion, Edwige Fenech, with the work that she did with Sergio Martino, and I don't know if Case of the Bloody Irises was a Martino film as well.
It is not.
Okay,
it was
and
produced
then, of course,
by Luciano.
Yeah, and then Strip Nude for Your Killer is another one that she's in as well. That's not Martino, but this one, Strange Vice of Missive Ward, and All the Colors of the Dark are all, kind of that trifecta. And incidentally have the only one that's missing from this film is George Hilton. But I don't know how we would be able to fit him in. We've got Ivan Razumov with his interesting wig hairpiece to cover up his real hair in this one. And he doesn't have his piercing blue eyes that he has in most of his other films.
That is true.
Ward.
No, and that is really powerful in those movies as well.
I think what's really jumps off the screen of this Giallo in particular. And I think Christopher and Bill, it speaks to what we're talking about is the chemistry among the stars of the film, the people who made the film, from the writer to the cinematographer to the chemistry of the actors, the most beautiful sets, the most amazing costumes. You can feel that there's an intimacy to how the film looks that really belies its very B movie, almost trashy approach to the plot. And that, I think, is really what elevates Martino's classic Gialli, is that he knows how to make his characters look really cool, be really cool, but the camera, his camera in particular, loves Edwige Fenech, and that's why we still see that when we watch her on screen today.
Now, tell me real quick, Stephanie, can you give us an overview of Sergio's career? Like, where did he start? How does he end up making these? Is it 5 Giallos? He only makes like 5, right? It's a very small number.
It is.
And he has a prolific output of just film in general, which I think sometimes he's surprised that Americans are very focused on these 5 movies and not so much some of his other filmography. Which I admittedly also have not seen his other films outside of this genre, which I feel bad about. It seems like he directed a lot of Italian comedies, and dramas as well. And it's interesting because like recently he's done stuff as recently as 2012. It looks like, at least according to IMDb. There might be other things more recent. I do really like this poster for the comedy where there's just a guy in a tie getting knocked in the balls by a bunch of soccer balls. That's fun. But you know, it's an incredible career. It sounds like he started studying literature and film and eventually ended up doing like production work, like second unit camera work, a little bit of cinematography, and a lot of writing. Can you kind of walk me through that?
You actually walked me through most of it, Bill, but yes, I mean, bravo. But what you have touched on is that Sergio's career is, if nothing else, by how prolific he was, that should go down in the tomes and the fine print of film history. So Sergio was born into a filmmaking family. His grandfather made the first sound film in Italy and had apparently all sorts of affairs with actresses. And at one point, there was a love child in the family. I still haven't gotten the whole story, but he grew up with actors, actresses. The entirety of filmmaking was, how and he was raised. He and his brother would do all sorts of little plays at home. They loved to dress up. They loved the costumes. So even as children, they were very imaginative and they loved to put on shows and scenes for whatever, captive audience they coerced into watching. And then through his family's connections, as well as the fact that as Italy moved through its post-war economy, film, of course, became a major tentpole of bringing Italy back to the world stage as a glamorous place to be, a rich place to be. And there were so many films made around that time. Going into film, making film was seen as a really smart career decision. Unlike even now in America, when you tell somebody, I want to be a director, they will laugh at you, whereas in Italy, it was just a whole different approach to making art, having content, bringing people together. There's sort of a mythology that there was a film screened in Italian villages, every night from the 50s to the 70s. But the fact was, just like everywhere else, theaters were the places where people went to hang out, catch a newsreel, catch a film. And he stepped into that with a lot of technical ability, with a lot of insight. He did do a lot of secondary crewing for other people. He made his first films in the mondo genre.
Oh my goodness.
yes, filming one of them in Chicago at the Playboy Club for his Naked and Afraid film. God, I'd love to see that. And after
That's
that,
wild.
isn't that amazing? And went after the Mondo films in the late 60s, interestingly, went right into what we now call his five canonical Gialli. It was the right time, it was the right script, and they had their secret weapon, which was Edwige. No one else had her. And Bill, you said it's obvious she's a movie star. And when Sergio told me about how he and Luciano, his brother, met her, Luciano basically saw her on the street, pointed to her and said, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." I mean, she just jumped out of the screen of the street. She had the looks. The camera loved her, and they began all working together, producing films, writing films, and in her case, starring in the films. After the Gialli, the market changed, and he went into the thrillers, the procedurals. He made a lot of westerns. He did a lot of car films. In the 80s, he went right into all the knockoffs with Hands of Steel and 20 at New York after the fall 2019. And then through the 90s,
What a
he
name.
actually did a lot of, I'm sorry?
What a title. That's crazy. That's a
Yes, what a
great title.
title. It's a wild film, and in fact, really speaks to children of men, in that Sergio in this film predicted that the painting of Guernica would be something that had been saved for the elite. And he kind of does that in a few of the scenes of the film that we'll talk about. Ultimately, he ended up doing a ton of television, which a lot of those guys from the working in film in the 70s ended up doing. And now, as recently as last year, he was at a con called Weird Worcestershire in England, and was one of the stars of the con.
That's awesome. I mean,
Yeah,
the reception he got at the Music Box was incredible. I mean, that place was packed. So it's really cool to
rightly
watch
so.
somebody. It's cool to watch him get his
Truly
flowers
is.
now, because when we were all younger, I know it was his films were one of those things that was kind of like, I found out about him through Tarantino, really, because Tarantino with Grindhouse opened this whole world to people my age of just awareness of like the Grindhouse era. I knew nothing about it. I knew films from the era, like Suspiria, I was kind of aware of, but got me digging way deeper into Giallo and like a lot of the other subgenres, some of which I don't like very much, like Notsploitation I have no time for, but Giallo I fell in love with because it's so it's so vibey and atmospheric and like beautiful. And that's how I kind of got into this stuff. But it's good to see these guys who used to be obscure names to Americans become kind of household names. And actually, it did make my search for criticism harder, but I did find Catholic criticism from Italy that I had to translate. So I'll be reading that later in the episode. So let's dive into this movie. We open on a credit sequence that has, I believe, is Fenech, or is it Strindberg?
It's supposed to be Anita Strindberg.
It's supposed to be Anita Strindberg.
And it's okay. It's Luigi and Anita.
Okay.
Kind of using that same Giallo motif opening sequence that's used in so many other films. Like, I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Interestingly,
did you say Luigi, or is the character Oliviero or Luigi?
Well, Luigi Pistoли is the actor.
Okay.
Olivier, yeah. If are we going with character names, or are we going with actor names? So
we can go back and forth. It's fine. I was trying to keep
that would be Signor Oliverio Rovini and his mistress Irene. In the credit sequence, with that kind of obscure, soft focus, where it's
with some very loungy music, which I love
with
about this era.
The Bruno Nicolai soundtrack that he's conducting. And then we cut to, drunken, like Oliverio, like sweats J&B Scotch at every frame that he's in, where he's basically at this almost cultish, commune in the probably his mother's home.
Yeah, it's his
You know, the
ancestral
castle,
home.
the
It's
villa.
a
Yeah,
chateau, I think might be the right term,
yeah,
or villa. Yeah, I think one of the. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a chateau. It's not in France, but a villa.
yeah,
The home of nobility. Like this is a home
yeah.
that we could not afford. It's really a home he couldn't afford if he didn't come from that bloodline.
And I feel like if we're talking about, like we were talking about the Gothic earlier,
Yeah,
this really plays on that, and the fact that
it
like
does.
setting is so important with Giallo, whether it's the streets of Rome, up some stairs, a crowded alleyway, a rock quarry where our characters pick up prostitutes, you know, for a night interlude. Setting is so key, and like the ancestral like dining room where everything's going on. uh you've got the drugs, the booze, the sex. You've got the girl dancing on the table. And then we're introduced to Anita Strindberg, who's probably most remembered in Fulci's Lizard in a Woman's Skin. And that's another one of the great things about the Giallo are the titles. you know
Yeah.
is this kind of like a whole animal thing that's going on. I think Fulci, one of Fulci's first official debuts was "Don't Torture a Duckling," which I imagine is probably on your Catholic list as well,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
something down in the future.
Definitely. The struggle with
Yeah.
that, of course, is finding out what the name was when it got imported. Did the Catholics
Okay.
actually? Because it's weird. Because there are some Martino films they did review in the U.S. and
Yeah.
some they did not. We were originally going to do Deep Red for this episode, which is not a Martino film; it's an Argento film. But since I knew Stephanie was going to go hang out with Sergio soon, I was like, "Well, let's do a Vice. Let's just do it." Since we just saw it, we screened it. You screened it. I didn't screen it, but I was there. So that was our thought process. But there are some of these films that just like they have like 4 different titles, right? This one
Yeah.
was called Gently Before She Dies, Eye of the Black Cat, and Excite Me. But something interesting about this opening is, watching it from afar, we don't really think about when the hippie era really ended. And at this point in 72, you're after the Manson murders. And so the 70s are very much underway. This is like a remnant of the free love era at this point. It's 1972. This stuff is kind of starting to go out the window, but it is still around. This type of like hippie youth culture is still happening. It's still around, and it's going to be changing very shortly. And it's interesting in comparison to, I was just thinking about the Robert Altman film, The Long Goodbye, the other day, where there's a scene where the Elliot Gould character comes on to a balcony and there's a bunch of like just nude hippies sitting out there smoking weed, and he's kind of, not only is he a figure out of time because he's like a private eye from the 1940s in the 70s playing Marlowe during that period, but also like this is something that's like, the way it's being presented is that it's kind of degenerate and falling away. Like the sort of aspirations of the free love movement of the hippie era are just looking, these kids in this movie all look like a bunch of spoiled rich kids who went and lived in a campground because they could, like they could easily, it feels like they could easily go back to their parents and be taken care of just fine.
Or just go back to the universities they're at.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it does have that feel. This also feels like, it reminds me of the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, Ken Casey's whole like group of hippies he surrounded himself with after he wrote his big novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And rather than like sit down and like keep writing, he just went off on some crazy acid fueled journey out in San Francisco, and then they'd go around their bus. But in this case, the author is much less active. He's kind of self-loathing. It's like he's impotent in his writing, and I mean, maybe not impotent in his ability to have sex, but kind of impotent in his home life.
He's got to have the dress.
He's
The
got to have
dress
the
has to come into play. He's got to have the dress, and that dress has to come into play, which goes back to that Carlotta element with the picture,
Yes.
which I think even goes back to Poe in Fall of House of Usher, with the relationship between,
Right.
this whole idea, and then also goes to the Black Cat with, various people in a story that are being buried behind bricks. It's Cask of Amontillado, it's, the floorboards and, Tall Tale Heart. And then this was also, the idea of being buried alive was
the
one
premature
of the major
burial.
fears. The premature burial keeps coming back again and again in a lot of post fiction.
Yes, and it's this movie's interesting because it does talk a lot about, like, I mean, the last movie we did was The Brood, which we talked about being a lot of mommy issues in that movie, or daddy issues, I'm sorry, in that movie. And this movie is very much mommy issues, the movie, because our boy only really likes to have sex with his wife when she wears this dress that was owned by his mother and worn by his mother and that she wears in the painting. And there's a pretty early in this movie, we get a pretty fucked up idea of how messed up these people are, because especially this guy, because while this hippie orgy's going on, he mixes all this liquor together in like a big punch bowl and force feeds his wife this like disgusting jungle juice they've created.
Like right out of Freaks.
Yeah, right out of Freaks.
I also thought, and I'm going to say this with the most lightest of touches, it was like an alcoholic bukkake. She was just
Jesus.
She was the dregs. She was humiliated through
Yes.
a physical act that he could not perform in public, a sexual one. But I think that was absolutely an act of sexualized aggression, and he is doing it in public. I mean, this guy is a POS. He is loathsome, and right off the rip, we see that he's just a total scumbag. He is somebody who we are going to hate immediately. And I love how Martino has no problem with that. Like, this guy sucks. Hate him. I love it. In the ambiguity, there's no ambiguity.
I mean, obviously you put yourself into your work no matter what, but it feels like, do you think Sergio, despite the fact that you don't really want to judge your characters I assume he's looking at these people being like, these people are fucking awful, right? Like, that's the intent here.
Sergio has stated, and the reason that I've just loved these films is because his whole thing is beautiful people who are morally ambiguous doing terrible things to each other. He loves that. And I think when you think about when he was making this movie, it was post-fascism, post-World War II. He had a camera in his hand. He had a beautiful star, and he had a blast. But nothing about his films had any fixed or obvious ideas of good or bad. So I think that you'll see in this film, in most of his films, he's sort of checked out. He just presents these very complicated people who happen to be really beautiful in very morally ambiguous situations.
Well, it's interesting too. I did a little bit of research on just politics in Italy at this time, and this is a time of a lot of extremist acts of political violence, which we can kind of relate to right now. But there were the Red Brigades, who were a leftist urban guerrilla group who were planning high-profile attacks, and there were also neo-fascists kind of reemerging who carried out bombings and assassinations. So it's a period of very widespread social unrest throughout Italy that this is landing in. And it's interesting that he chooses to put them in this decrepit, stately home. It's the home of of nobility, but it's very much falling apart. They can't afford to patch the roof. She says at one point, and Irina says at one point, I just feel like one of these days the roof's going to cave in on our heads and kill us. Right. So he's painting it as decadence, whether he's intending to do that or not. It does look at these people as kind of like, this is like the decaying corpse of like the old guard, in my mind, at least from my perception.
Agreed, 100%. Agreed, 100%. And he's doing it with respect for the aesthetic.
Chris?
I was just going to, in addition to the Red Brigades in the 1970s, Europe, we're also talking about, the height of, the popularity of the Baader Meinhof gang in Germany as well, where they were basically student, hippie commune student revolutionaries. And then, they're like, throwing, doing protests in the street. And then by the ending, they're hijacking airplanes and kidnapping dignitaries, and like all their main members are being held in a prison, and they kind of became folk heroes in the eyes of like the German populace. And this like kind of, another subgenre. I remember reading this. I can't remember. I think it was Immoral Tales. Kind of like the whole women in prison thing kind of came from the Baader Meinhof gang. The idea that you have co-ed terrorist groups, and like,
Right.
the free love of the 60s, but like with this like post-Manson viciousness, and the politics of the world that's going on, from World War II, fascism, the Nazis, all of it falling apart, and just everything that's happening with, what would become happening in the Cold War, and crises in the Middle East. And I don't know if we want to go this deep into all of these things, but this kind of talks about how we're talking about where, we were, I mean, I was just walking past the UN earlier this afternoon. So, we saw a plethora of different protests just blocks away from the United Nations because people are in town visiting.
Right. People. Certain people.
They're everywhere, man. They're
Yes, they
everywhere.
are.
But yes, I think what we're all saying is there is a lot going on right now, and within this very short sequence of architecture, conflict, color, cinematography, the portrait, we are thrust into this decaying, decadent world of beauty and pain.
And an important detail of this intro scene as well is we established the two things he really seems to care about, which are beyond his mother, is his mother's black cat, which is named Satan, A+ name for a cat in a movie, and then the dress, which is we've talked about before, but also I need to note it was a dress his mother wore to portray Mary Stuart, aka one of the wives of Henry VIII. So that's very telling about where this movie wants to go. And it's a detail I didn't pick up on the first time I saw it. I had to watch it a few times and kind of read about it, and then I picked up on it. In this opening scene, we also get something that Stephanie warned everybody about when she screened it, which is the very straightforward racism in this movie. And I want to be careful to say, this is reflecting the Italian society at this time. There was a lot of fear about integration in Italy at this time, and there was a lot of racism, especially in a more rural setting. You are going to have people who are straight up racist. The one thing that kind of bugs me about this movie with this character, we'll get into a little bit later, it's hard to watch by modern standards the way that this man interacts with his is she considered a maid, Stephanie? Is that like the official like title for her in their household?
Correct. I suppose we could call her the housekeeper, but
Right.
I think it unfortunately has more resonance to call her a maid, particularly in the way Olivero interacts with her.
Well, he's immediately putting his hand down her shirt and feeling her breasts and revealing them in this scene, which is highly uncomfortable with everyone else around. And it's important, I think, to the character in a way, because it establishes the fact that this man will act this way in front of company. So how is he going to act in the rest of the movie when people aren't around, or when it's just him and, Anita Strindberg? I think that's kind of important. There's some things that feel unnecessary, but I do get the intent to like, we need to establish that this is a vile man. And that's what this scene does. Now, shortly after this, we kind of established that the writer has a much younger mistress who works at a bookstore in town. He drives into town with Anita Strindberg, aka Irina, and they go to this bookstore. He doesn't really go in to buy anything. He goes in basically to talk to her, and he uses going to the bookstore as an excuse to like have a conversation. The guy who runs the bookstore asks him, about, when are you putting out your next novel? Why haven't you done that? I have a question about the guy in the bookstore, by the way, Stephanie. He does show up later in the movie, right? Like, I'm not confused by that.
You are confused about many things, Bill, but no, you are not confused about that.
Okay.
He does show up later in the movie, and he shows up later in the movie in a way that is a wonderful red herring and speaks to the Hitchcockian, Agatha Christie-ish structure of the whodunit in this movie.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that later. I just wanted to ask that question because I noticed it on this watch, and we will discuss. But for now, we get back to the house.
Hold on, Bill. I do want to mention something
Sure.
about the time in the bookshop.
Oh, sure.
So the discussion about not only when is his next novel going to be written, but the bookseller really knew how to get under Oliveira's skin by saying, you had this great bestseller, it's not even on the shelves anymore, what are you doing all day? And to me it really was a preview of what we were going to see from Jack Torrance in The Shining, that
Oh, interesting.
he's this writer trapped in this house with, women and children against him. So I just felt that that's a really interesting and very a timeless trope, that the writer can no longer write and he's trapped inside this giant piece of Gothic architecture. So we just really got more of that, and we saw how Olivero and the bookseller kind of hate each other, which I love. Just little local gossip in this movie.
Right. And I mean, this obviously leads to our first murder of the film, with he agrees to meet his mistress at a specific location, and it ends up being kind of this weird quarry, right? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
It's a very weird location. There's like a quarry and a barn, which is a strange place for a hookup or a date or whatever,
Yeah,
what have you.
but hold on. You got to think about where and how we are at the time. So,
Right.
let's just say we're in 1970, just because I'm terrible at math. You know, 25 years before that, that quarry and barn were probably working. They were places where men did physical labor and where they stored whatever they needed. And now, in this age of newfangled machinery, and they're all driving cars, and they're all moving around from the campsite to this beautiful villa. They have become totally irrelevant. They're just obsolete. They're places where people are now going to be in secret because nobody cares or even knows they're there anymore.
Well, and that speaks to the kind of like the decay of the house too. I mean, there's all these places that are just kind of abandoned or forgotten or that need repair. And so
Yes.
and also it is practicality of just probably Sergio could get this really interesting location. Let's use it. But also I love the way that he makes that choice to use it this way.
Definitely.
And this begins the investigation into Olivero, because they know he's a volatile alcoholic, right? They know he's got all these weird hippies living with him. It makes sense they would suspect him right away. So they come to him.
Now, who is they? Let's be sure to establish they, because there's a police element to this. There's a procedural structure to this. And the police guy who shows up is a riot in that
Inspector
suit.
Farla.
Yeah, I love this character.
Yes.
He's played by Franco Nebbia. And it becomes this thing of this sort of cat and mouse game of like trying to catch this guy, but is he even the killer? We'll find out. So we're in this quarry essentially, and this is where we get our first iconic Giallo murder scene. Chris, what are some of the elements that make this a very like iconic and typical Giallo scene at the same time?
Okay, so some of the themes that we always get in the Italian Giallo is the idea that we have certain objects that are always in every film.
Right.
The weapon of choice is usually a straight razor. There's elements of some kind of sexual repression that permeates the entire plot. There is the knife or razor, right, is used. It's very Freudian and phallic. The idea that it is symbolically penetrating the victim. And I feel like maybe that this was a way that Italian filmmakers were sticking it to the Vatican, because it was during the 1970s where the strict censorship in Italy was getting taken away, and like the ratings board was pretty much saying, you guys are pretty much free to do whatever you want. So we had everything from, the psychosexual thrillers with numerous shower scenes to, gut-eating zombies to cannibal films.
And even Fellini's Satyricon, you have classy, sort of, prestigious art fair that has a crap ton of nudity and other things in it that wouldn't have been they wouldn't have been able to do that before this.
And our killer is always masked. We don't know who they are. And we're also unsure of their gender. It's a figure.
Yes.
It's a figure, usually in a black trench coat or some kind of trench coat. They might be wearing a hat. They always
often
have
genderless.
Yeah. They always have black leather gloves. And then we will have that, from our, Olivier, bottles of J&B Scotch. In fact, there's one scene where the delivery guy is dropping off the liquor order of cases of J&B for the
and
next.
Then they also, she gives bottles to the was it the rag and bone lady? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
What is a rag and bone person, by the way? Does anybody know? I've never really looked this up, but I really should have before this episode. Just somebody who collects junk, essentially, like our scrap guys who run around the alleys.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Correct. Yeah, she's the junk lady. But in this murder scene, something happens that hasn't happened before, and that is we hear the harpsichordian chaos of Nikolai's score when the killer starts running toward Faustina, when the chase is on, and that insane theme of the chords and the movement and the percussive nature of the music, that is so amazing. And I think the use of music in Giallo is another trope or a beat that is just perfect in these moments. The killing is really enhanced by this like psychotic nature of the score.
Well, this is a good time to talk about this because I've not really talked about the experimental nature of Morricone's work and the guys who followed him, but they were a pretty small crew of people. And a lot of times they didn't have access to like the biggest orchestras. So they were really innovating with things like reverb, delay, tape effects, tape loops, and things like that. And you can hear a lot of that in this movie. I'm not exactly sure, but I know they had to have a sound guy in this film, but it does sound like they may have even been involved somewhat in combining the music with the sound effects in this movie, because I'm hearing things like there's points where the score is coming in, but then you also hear footsteps, but the footsteps sound like they're run through a spring reverb. So it's almost like during the discordant scenes, Nikolai is playing with both, working maybe with the sound engineer. I'm not sure. This is my guess, but working with the sound department to also kind of like echo sound effects in the music he's playing. And that's super interesting. And something I love about these scores, as someone who collects these when I can find them, is that they veer back and forth between the very romantic sort of lush string pieces for love scenes. They have these kind of like funky lounge tracks that I love getting compilations of those. They're so good to even like sample or DJ out or like, play in a set. And then also you have this sort of like 20th century classical style of composition, which is inspired by stuff like, maybe I don't know the exact influences, but people like Boulez, Ioannis Xanaxis, Schoenberg, Mahler, it's and noisier stuff, obviously, Stockhausen, things like that. So they're pulling from a lot of, these guys know their music. They know where music has been. They know where it's going. And they're throwing all that stuff into a soup in a way that no one else had done before. And that's why like they're today considered highly influential, even though at the time they were just cranking out work essentially. But there's a reason why we call Morricone the maestro now, and why Nikolai is very much like a close second in terms of just respect and notoriety in the world of Italian film scores.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment for this film in particular. It really, to me, is when the music becomes its own character.
It really is. And it's interesting the way that they shift and slowly ratchet the tension up throughout the movie. And shortly after this, not long after this, we have the murder of the maid, Brenda. What happens is she's in the home with the author, with Olivero, and she makes the mistake of what we're going to find out is very much a mistake of trying on his mother's dress. His mother's name was Esther, by the way. We didn't mention that. So Olivero is drunk. He can kind of see her putting this thing on. there is a really weird scene where she's trying it on, and for some reason she has it open and she's like feeling up her own breasts, which feels very much like a producer note or director note, depending. I how do both of you feel about like the nudity in this movie, by the way? Because I feel like there's a lot of nudity in this that is either sexualized during scenes of sexual violence, or it's this sort of like this scene is very like it could easily be in an erotic film or in a porn. It's so weird. I'm sure there are women who do this, but it's just very odd that she would try on the mother's dress, and instead of focusing on the dress, she's focusing on her own boobs. I just found that weird. Stephanie?
This is a very, very interesting scene. So I do want to back up a little bit. Brenda, to me,
Sure.
is a fascinating character. And when we first see her in this little sequence, she's in bed. She's
Right.
hanging out in her room, and she is looking at porn of white women.
Yes, she
And
is, which raises some
that
questions.
that is just so far out. But I think, given Martino's command of structure, it is the perfect mirror for Olivero's aggression, sexual aggression toward Brenda. So when she puts the dress on, she is slipping into a reverie of being a desired white woman. And through the clothing, through her touching herself, she is experiencing her own identity through pleasure, through secrecy, through, what we do in these great Gothic mansions. The
Right.
fact that she also fondles the dress, and we see her beautiful skin with the nails against that purple. Again, it's a balance of color, of gender, of identity in a way that is visually very confident.
Even class. It's saying a lot about class and about
Definitely.
racism in Italy, which was a big, like I said, a big problem because integration was becoming more of a thing, and there was a big pushback toward it.
So the character of Brenda touches on a lot of social, racial, gender issues that were going on at the time. And part of Sergio's genius, I think, is that rather than expound upon them, he makes the character that they represent so far out. She's really her own weird person dealing with her own weird shit, just like the rest of these crazy ass people in this villa. She's
Right.
she's part of the problem too.
This raises
and
a question as well in regards to her, and I'm wondering. We didn't mention in the first scene, but there's this moment where when he's kind of accosting her, the hippies break into this song, and my instinct was, is this some kind of like spiritual or something? I couldn't really find info on what the song was, but I was like, is this a racist moment? Like, what is happening here? It was so bizarre. And do you have a take on that, Stephanie, or know what Sergio was thinking there with that scene and that moment in regards to Brenda?
I do have a take on that.
Okay.
I think I don't know what Sergio's motivation was in that scene particular when the
Okay.
hippie gal burst into song. I think, well, I do know something about Sergio's approach to the Floriana character played by Edwige, who we're going to get to soon, is
Yes.
that she really represented the youth revolt that was happening in Italy. And I think the gal bursting into what was basically a farm song, what was a spiritual, what was songs that women sang to their daughters, that grandmothers sang to their granddaughters, to rally the spirit, to look to the future. It's actually a very positive song about freedom and liberation. I
Okay.
personally didn't think it was through the lens of anything racial. I thought it was through the lens of somebody responding to the victimization of Irina and giving her permission, however covertly, to fuck this guy.
No, that makes sense. I've heard different takes on it, which is why I asked. I've heard the accusation of racism. I've heard it described the way you've said, and that's why I just want to throw the views out there and just kind of talk about it. So that is interesting. And I mean, it's one of those things where there is a point where it's like, well, there's an element of this that might be subjective for different people. So I'm not sure how to take it. I want to watch it again and think about what you just told me about that scene. So Brenda is this interesting character in the movie. It unfortunately does fall under that trope of like the one black character in a 1970s horror film is going to get bumped off early in the movie, which does happen shortly after she tries on the dress. And in this
But on
scene,
the other hand,
yeah,
Bill, you could easily say that the skinny white lady in Psycho was the first person to get killed off in that movie. I think at some point the Brenda character had to move the plot along.
I'm not saying it's
that
necessarily
simple.
wrong. I'm saying it's a trope that now has become kind of a cliche. At the time, this was
Indeed.
kind of
Fair enough.
establishing the trope. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, it's at this point, like this is when the trope is established. So I'm not even like saying he should have been aware of it. It's just something that in hindsight you kind of pick up on. You're like, oh yeah, there's that again. But I do think her character is really interesting in this and does kind of add to the story and gives us character information about these people. In this scene, it's interesting. Usually you think of like if the killer in a Giallo is attacking someone, they're going to keep using the same knife or the same like straight razor. But in this scene, she's killed with something described as it's called a bill hook, which is a cutting tool that's used in agriculture or forestry. And it's kind of like a vintage one too. It's for like cutting up shrubs or small trees or branches. So it's like a long saw, maybe about a foot long blade, and then a handle that's probably like 6 or 7 inches. So pretty nasty way to go, honestly. And they hit her right through the front. It's done in this very Giallo way. The flash of steel, the very red blood, the black gloves, all that stuff is here, and it bleeds all over the gown, which is like when that's one of your protected objects in the house. That's the last thing you want, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I love the idea of the mother's dress soaked in this black woman's blood. That is fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's got to be devastating to Oliviero because it's one of the few things he seems to actually care about in this movie, along with the cat. And at this point, he's basically like, look, Irina, you need to help me we need to take care of this together. I can't go to the cops. But she's already vouched for him to the cops when they came earlier and basically went along with his alibi. So at this point, she kind of goes along with it. Now, we don't know exactly why, I think, at this point in the movie, because we won't really know till the end what she was thinking, the whole way along with this. But she helps him, and they taking a page from Poe, they go down to the basement, roll back a giant wine cask, open up the wall, and bury her in the wall.
And by her, we mean Brenda.
Yeah. Brenda, not Irina, who is very much alive.
Connected also to Poe is that, this is while all this is happening from point of view, the cat is observing all of this and watching it, and like the character of the cat is like like an ominous presence that watches over everything in this villa, and we discover that Irina is not fond of the cat, and she's a little afraid of him.
True.
The feeling is very mutual as well.
Yes.
Satan hates this woman.
Yes.
Yes. And we get the sense that the mother in a lot of ways might be haunting this movie. The mother is the sort of absent character who is present in the cat in a lot of ways.
That is alluded to.
Yeah. It's similar to the Poe movie that Roger Corman did, Tomb of Ligeia, where it's implied that the cat is kind of like contains like the spirit of his dead wife. And it's interesting how like these ideas like go transfer back and forth, even though that wasn't maybe explicit. Well, of course, the black cat itself implies that the cat is kind of like it's almost like his wife is possessing the cat from beyond the grave to get revenge. So it's interesting that pops up in these different Poe variations that are telling different stories, but kind of like borrowing here and there. But they all latch onto that idea, which is really interesting. At this point, we're getting to the point where the niece Floriana decides to come to town, and this is and it's funny because like Oliviero, he still thinks of her as an annoying kid, so he's just like put out. He's just like, I don't want to deal with this like person who is, a child just running around, not really thinking about the fact that she's grown up. They're waiting for her at the nearby train station, and this is where we get a look at a mysterious gray-haired man who is very suspicious. And he would deliver Esther's dry cleaned gown to Irina. So we're asking ourselves, who is he to her? What is that relationship? Meanwhile, Olivera and Irina are waiting for the niece, Floriana, and they're at the train station, and she's not there. Who does get off is Giovanna and a madame. So it's kind of implied. I thought she was her aunt at first, and then I realized she kept calling her madame in the movie, which implies that she's a sex worker who works for this madame in this town. And there's a moment here where there's a prominent butt shot as she gets off the train, and the way the dialogue is staged is comedic because you think that it's the niece, and then you realize it's just a sex worker. It's not. He's not checking out the niece. He's checking out the sex worker. Not that it makes any of it any better, but it is like this weird, like kind of a bait and switch moment. So they head back, and then they run into Floriana. Just pulls up in a car and says, "Oh, hi, I'm here."
I hitched.
Yeah, she hitched the whole way, which is, again, kind of, I think you're right, Stephanie, playing into the youth culture thing of the time. This character, originally written to be 17, aged up a little bit so that she could be played by Edwige. Is it Edwige or Edwige? Edwige. So they aged her up to be the same age or close in age to Edwige. I do think her haircut and her styling is meant to make her look younger than she really is, but not exactly 17, which honestly, I'm glad she's not 17 in this movie. It makes that would make it a lot harder to stomach some of the stuff that happens as it goes on.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Bill, Christopher, we are a third of the way into this film, and we've seen murders. We've seen a prostitute get her butt grabbed, but now we see Edwige Fenech. Oh my God. Every time I see this scene, I don't even know where to look. How is anybody that beautiful? She is a stone cold fox. It's just not even fair. And that beauty, that energy, that sass changes the entire tone of the film. I mean, really nothing happens until she shows up.
Right. And that's the thing. Like she really is like the catalyst that gets the rest of this thing moving, because I think before this, you're like, where is this going? And Floriana adds this element of, okay, now things are getting really interesting. We have this sort of like cause of like potential stress in the home.
It reminds me of an old Orson Welles take, how he was referring to the third man. The idea that, like, here's the main character, this mysterious character who we're like, everybody's been kind of alluding to in some way, and then finally they appear. Harry Lime makes his appearance, from the carnival, and Edwige Fenech, she pulls up in the convertible. She has a very 1960s hairstyle. I always wondered if, because a lot of her films, she always has the long hair. If this was around the same time that, Strip Nude for Your Killer was made, where she has short hair as well and she's grown out a little bit for the role. But I don't know what the choice was, to cut the hair, make her look different than her usual trademark long dark hair that, she was mostly known for.
Strip Nude is 3 years later, so I doubt it. It's probably it's the style they went with for this particular movie, I think.
Also, what this reminds me of too is, I kind of touched it a little bit at the beginning, is that our characters are Sadian. They're like right out of the pages of de Sade. And Eugenie de Franval is one of de Sade's short stories that Jess Franco made into a film with Soledad Miranda later on, actually a couple years, 2 years before this was released. And that also has a dubious relationship amongst its, protagonists.
Was Stephanie, that Marquis de Sade, Justine? Was that the name of it?
So you bring up Justine. And in some ways, the misfortune and perils that Irina goes through are similar in what Irena does.
Floriana has arrived. She is a fox. There is crackling sexual tension immediately. And they all pile into the sleek car. Man, that is a fabulous car that Olivero is
Yes,
driving, by the way.
it is. Yes.
And they head home for their first little sleepover.
You could call it that for sure.
The scene where they all start talking in that salon is some heavy shit. Like,
Yeah.
there is a lot of psychological game playing happening with someone who the audience knows is a threat, but we don't know how. And both Irena, I think, and Olivero at some level have sort of already decided who and how Floriana is going to be.
Yeah, and it gets pretty messy pretty quickly from what I wrote down. I mean, it's like we pretty quickly find out that what Olivero gets mad at Irena because she had this sort of like late night drop off of the dress with the stains cleaned out of it. He locks her in a closet. Floriana teases
her.
What's that?
That's when Satan attacks Irena.
Satan attacks her because yep, she's clawed by Satan in the closet. Floriana confronts her uncle about his attraction to her and alludes to a rumor that he had an affair with his own mother, Esther, which doesn't surprise me given what we've seen so far. And then later, Floriana finds Irena in the closet and lets her go. And at this point, Irena's kind of confides to Floriana, says, about just the way things have been, Olivero's drunken abuse, and whatnot. And bizarrely, this leads to the two of them having sex.
Why do you think that's bizarre?
I mean, I guess it doesn't make sense. It doesn't not make sense with the character of Floriana, who we find out is very it almost feels like a red herring. Like we're being she's very sexually free, which I think the movie is telling us, could she be the one who did this? Could she be, it's setting up all these suspicious characters who may or may not be the murderers. It sets up the husband. It sets up Floriana as potentially, like, could she be behind the murders? And this definitely adds to that suspicion. What is she up to? Why is she getting right into bed with Irena when she's in a vulnerable state? It raises a lot of questions. And it's only complicated by what happens in the following scenes.
Well, I do want to linger a bit on how Floriana starts to reveal herself to the characters, particularly Irena. So one of the things that I absolutely love about this Floriana character is that she is the spiritual big sister of Catherine Trammell. Floriana is a knockout. She will fuck anybody. She will fuck anybody on the first date.
For the uninitiated, can you explain Catherine Trammell real quick to people?
Like anybody is uninitiated who listens to this podcast, yes. Catherine Trammell is the cool, icy blonde protagonist of one of my favorite films in the world, Paul Verhoeven's Basic Instinct. Holy living fuck, I love that movie. But watching Floriana come to life, this is a chess game that she is ready to play. She is ready to win. We will understand soon what she is after, but she's there for a reason, and she is going to use the fact that she is a bodacious menace to get what she wants. And the first thing she wants is Irena on her side, because Irena is going to have the information about Floriana's main goal in this film, but she also understands that by sleeping with Irena, who is desperate for an ounce of kindness, of pleasure, of intimacy, will completely render Irena helpless in terms of that relationship. And it will also set Olivero completely on edge. It's a master stroke of this character's psychology.
It is. And it is like one of those things where at first you kind of see this scene and you go, this feels out of nowhere. But when you see what unfolds, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I mean, sex is a bond, and she is maximizing that with a woman who is desperate for a bond.
Yes.
Floriana is going to find a way to try to manipulate both uncle and.
But see, she's not going to try to find a way. She knows the way.
Yeah.
She's going to find the opportunity when it is the most exploitative, most optimized, and most devastating for the other person's embarrassment.
Now, here comes a subplot after this, which I don't quite understand in context of the greater whole, but maybe you can enlighten me here. The scene where the sex worker Giovanna is attacked, and then the madam kills the attacker, who turns out to be Bartello, who's the manager of the bookstore.
The bookstore, yes.
Which is where, the mistress
Faustina.
of the
Yes.
Faustina worked.
Yes. So it's the bookseller who's killing the pretty women of the village. And we get a little backstory on him that he was an escaped maniac murderer from an asylum, which also speaks to just the most amazing fears and preoccupations of what was happening in Italy at the moment. And once he is killed by the madam, it seems that the murder of Faustina and by extension of Brenda has been solved.
But Brenda's still in the basement, which is that complicates things, I imagine.
Correct. It really does, actually. It really does.
Well, that clears things up. So we think he killed. Now, who do we think he killed? He killed the book Faustina, and then he killed Brenda, and he killed this he tried to kill this sex worker. And those are the people he's responsible for killing.
Right.
Correct.
So, okay. So moving forward, let's see here. At some point here, Floriana begins dating motorbike racer Dario. And this is the guy she met because he was like kind of running errands to the house, dropping off J&B scotch. I have a note about this scene where they kind of have a meet cute in front of the house, and he's delivering cream, I believe. And there's this joke about a sexual innuendo about cream. In the subtitled version, it's about the cream, which makes sense because his truck literally, I believe, says something about it on it. Yeah. In the American version, for whatever reason, he says something about a potato delivery, or she says something about needing potatoes, and then he says something along the lines of like, I'd like to mash those potatoes. And I was like, is there something about Americans that means that we wouldn't get jokes about ice cream or milk or cream? Does that somehow not work? Like, why did they change that? There's a lot of that. I watched the dub this time just for funsies and kept the subtitles on. There's some weird little things like that where they change entire meanings of phrases. I'm assuming for an American audience, but as an American, I was kind of like, this doesn't really help me any. It doesn't really change it for me.
It's funny that you mentioned that, is because like I started with the dub, and then I was like, no, I'm going to the Italian, because like you really get the true like feeling from the actors, and you get the translation from the subtitle, and it's just like it makes it for a more superior filming experience.
Well, I've watched both. I did watch both.
Yeah, I have too. But like, in some ways, like these movies from Italy, the 70s and 80s with the dubbing, especially like we're talking about like the work of Fulci, like The Beyond, or, they come off unintentionally.
Right.
But if you're doing like the actual Italian, it becomes more truthful, and you get the actual voices of the actual actors.
And we've talked about this before on here, but I think part of that is Italy had this tradition of shooting without sound on set and then dubbing everything later. And we're talking like high level filmmakers, Fellini, Visconti, Sergio Leone, all these people were doing all their sound post sync. And I think because it was the Italian way of making films, I think the Italian actors took the dubs more seriously. I get the impression that a lot of the Americans came into the studio to do dubs and they were like chain smoking, just like, all right, let's knock this out. And you can tell by the performances. Most of the performances are pretty bad half the time, unless it's somebody doing their own, like Burt Lancaster in The Leopard does a really good job. But again, he's doing his own dub, so it's a little bit different.
So, Bill, I actually can speak to that difference in the script. So, in Italy in the 70s and also
Okay.
in Spain in the 70s, there was still milk delivery.
Ah,
And if you look at a film called The Glass Ceiling or The Crystal Ceiling,
yeah.
which was a Spanish film by, I've just forgotten his name, a very prevalent Spanish director. The character, one of the characters is a milk delivery man, and it's his access to the people, to their homes, to their kitchens that drives part of the plot. So Americans would totally not get this like sexy boy coming with this ramshackle wagon carrying milk. It would totally not compute.
But potatoes?
I don't know. Maybe they thought there was an audience in Idaho. I don't know.
Like, Americans like the potatoes, it's just how we are.
That's how we are.
Yeah. So she starts dating Dario. Dario's a biker. Do you know if the motorbike scenes in this movie are something that was like a stock, or Sergio knew about a race going on and was like, let's go over there and shoot it, during the shoot, or like he had shot something else? Do you have any idea where this came from?
My impression is that it was totally done for this film.
Okay.
And he loves to shoot races. He's done
That's
a
why.
ton
So
of
that's
car
why it's in
films.
Torso too. The
Yes.
bike scenes in Torso as
Yes,
well.
That's right.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
And he loves the speed. He loves getting those fucked up point of views. And I can also tell you that having been in a car with him driving around Rome, that's legit how he drives. It's totally an authentic approach to motorized vehicles.
I remember you
course,
texting me that when that happened. You were like, Sergio's just whipping around Rome with me right now in his car.
I legit might die with Sergio Martino driving this car. But I think this scene, which seems so out of place, really pays off in the end. So yes, it's like a Martino signature to have a wacky little rally of some sort.
Yeah, and it's a nice break cinematically from what we've been seeing. And then when he has to drop out of the race, Dario takes Floriana back to an abandoned loft, and they have sex on the floor there. What they don't know is that Oliviero is spying on them. After this section, we have a part at night where Irina and the cat do not get along. I don't know if we've really talked about this, but Irina, is basically has a frightening interaction with the cat and stabs one of its eyes out. Now, what happens is the rag and bone lady, Mrs. Molinar, witnesses this. But Irina does not know that she witnesses this.
This is also
and the reason why, sorry, really quick. And the reason she does this, I should establish, is that Satan killed several of her pet doves who she dotes on earlier in the movie.
Yes, and I think the scene of the cat killing the doves is, of course, very symbolic, but it also speaks to the idea of an augury, of like an ancient Roman way of telling the future, which is how you killed a bird and you looked at its innards.
Oh, interesting. Like, okay.
Yeah, this is a bad augury we're having here. I love how the bad juju is never far away. It's always in the ether. It's always, the past is always coming back around this house.
It is. And that's why in the next scene, we actually have now Floriana trying on Oliviero's mother's gown. She obviously, do you think she senses that there's like a sexual connection to this dress, or is she trying to like evoke his wife to kind of get him to him get on her side?
I think she's
after he's spotted
aware of what she's.
She has to be, right?
Yeah.
And
she has the agency. She has the motivation. She knows exactly what she's doing. Like, she's like, okay, I got Irena. Now I'm going to get Oliviero.
Olivero.
Yeah.
And she bagged Dario as well. So
Right.
like she's killing it.
Yeah. I mean, it is the 70s. It's, a different time for that kind of thing.
Very, very different time. Good for her.
Right. And then she reveals at this point to him basically that he knew that Oliviero had spied on them in the loft while they were having sex.
Right.
So obviously what you do in this situation is you fuck your uncle.
Duh.
And that's literally what happens.
Yep.
And later,
I think all things being equal,
yeah,
that act is really where the film sort of like jumps into the third and final act, because once you've crossed that line of incest,
right.
like you're no longer in a villa that's crumbling. Like you're headed to Dante's hell.
Yeah, we're in Game of Thrones territory now.
Yeah, that's taken just a really dark, gothic, very depressing kind of turn.
Yeah, and I mean, interestingly, she goes.
Well. It's not going to end well.
No,
it's not.
And she goes to Irena after this and basically tells her about Oliviero's desire that is growing to murder her. Irena, not Floriana.
Yeah.
And she basically tells Irena, like, you should really kill your husband to make it look like an accident.
Enter Clouseau.
Yes. At this point, Irena actually eavesdrops on Floriana and Oliviero's pillow talk after this scene, and she actually hears Oliviero say that he wants to murder her and hide her body in the cellar with Brenda.
Yep.
There's actually a really interesting line around these discussions where Floriana says something like, one of these days he's going to kill you. And Irena says, and take away his favorite plaything? Never. So there's this weird stalemate between these two people. There's this weird impasse where Irena is confident that she will live because Oliviero can't stand to not have her around to torture to death. It's such like, it's so dark, it's so decrepit, it's so gothic. Again, I think this whole like sequence is when we know the film is like just on a downward slide.
Right.
And
yeah. No, it's
there's no recovery at this point.
And really, is anybody redeemed? Is anybody redemptive in this movie? I mean, do we have anybody to root for, really?
No, and I love it. No,
like they're like really three really repulsive, selfish, vicious characters that are, driven by their desires and passions and vices, and nothing.
Yeah, you have moments where you thought you could
will stop them at any point,
right? And I mean, eventually, after Oliviero realizes that she's heard this, he beats her in a scene it's pretty hard to watch him beat Irena in this scene. I understand it's necessary to establish like just what a bad guy he is, but man, sometimes I'm just like, I don't know if I need that much. It's like I get the idea.
Yeah, this was I'm very forgiving. I think the word is for these types of choices that directors from this era make. But this particular beating, there was something so helpless about Irene and so unhinged about Oliviero. I mean, look, the scene worked because we want her. We're starting to want her to get rid of this POS. And we're starting to see that maybe the Floriana character will assist Irena in doing that, because there's no way to get away from him. It's got to be a 2 against 1. So as an audience member, we're starting to take sides among people who shouldn't have any of our sympathy.
Right. And I mean, this is the point where is Satan helping or not? I don't know. Makes Irena chase him into the cellar, where she finds out that Brenda's corpse has been unearthed. It's uncovered. And this is very much evidence that, Oliviero wants to murder her and put her in the basement with Brenda. And what are you going to do in that situation?
The idea
Well,
of seeing your own grave in your home is so gothic. It's just so purple. I can't describe it
I know.
any other way. Like that's just one of the most like classic Poe moments. Like I kept expecting a heart to beat, from the telltale heart. But like
Right.
legitimately seeing your own grave, that's terrifying. And I love how the gothic in this, it's not gory, it's not even physical, it's all psychological. Anybody would lose their shit if they saw that.
Right. And she ends up murdering him with the same scissors she stabbed the eye of the cat out with. And at this point she asks Floriana to help her move the body of Oliviero into the basement rather than her, obviously. Floriana oddly does reveal that she covets some of Esther's valuable jewelry at this point.
Okay,
Which is a weird,
hold on.
Oh, okay.
I do want to get a bit into the scenes with the typewriter. Because
yes.
a typewriter is such an Agatha Christie move. I mean, that is
and it's again the Shining reference is here.
Classic. I'm sorry.
The Shining reference is here.
Yes.
Even though it's before the Shining,
Yes. Yes. So I just want to make sure, like, we are in this huge house. No one is there. Bodies are in the walls. And Irina catches him passed out in front of the typewriter, where the typewriter has read the first time kill Irina and put her in the cellar, and the second time says revenge.
Yep.
That's insane. Just how cold, how manipulative that type of psychology is. And yes, it absolutely predates The Shining, yet it's still so identifiable, isn't it? Like, anyone who's familiar with Poe or even Stephen King at this point would recognize how a typewriter is all necessary to the plot.
Now, question with the typewriter: is this stuff he's typing, or are other people typing it to set up a sort of like understanding of the scenario? I was trying to understand that.
Here's who typed it. It was the gray-haired guy.
It was. Okay. That was my thought, because it seemed odd that, okay. That was my thought. And we're going to get to that next.
Yes.
At this, well, first of all, we have to say that Floriana and Irina have sex. We also did miss the scene before this, and I feel bad we didn't mention it. There's an incredible scene, a picnic on a cliff with Floriana, Irina, and Oliviero. And it's one of the coolest scenes in the movie. They're on top of this big mountaintop, lots of atmospheric fog in the background, and you've got the two women in the foreground, Oliviero walking around in the back. It's a very big depth of field shot. And he's kind of moving, so the camera's moving following him, but we're staying with them kind of centered while they're kind of plotting against him. It's a really great piece of framing. And it just shows that you can tell they're plotting against him, even if you don't know what they're saying, because they're having this very intense conversation in foreground while he's just kind of blissfully unaware off by the cliff, which will come into play again in a second here.
And I think that's the only time we see all of them outside together, except for when they nab her at the car park. But later in the movie, I mean, this is the freedom of nature, right? There's only two ways to go, up or down at this particular scene. And the fact that we get that feeling of the danger of that cliff is really, again, going to pay off big in the next couple minutes.
Yes, because as Floriana and Irina have sex, during this time is when the mysterious figure enters the villa and repeatedly does type revenge or vendetta on the typewriter.
Now, hold on. Now, hold on. Before the girls have sex for the final time,
yes,
Floriana reveals her motives for being there. And that is for the inheritance of the jewels, which, again, is just laughable. It's just right out of an Agatha Christie. It's right out of the
especially with murder.
Yellow paper book that the genre was named after. It's so flimsy, and I just love the idea of the mother secreting away this jewelry generations have been handed down to her. And it's
Yes.
all in this like shitty box that Irina basically cannot wait to give to Floriana to get her out of there. And again,
Seriously.
it's those shifting morals. Like at one point, those things in that box would have guaranteed, money and prestige. And now they're just trinkets this hussy has come to steal.
No, true. It really reveals her to just kind of be petty. I mean, and you went through all that for the jewels, which is a little crazy. And at this point, Floriana flees the villa. And this is where we finally have our reveal of who the gray-haired man is. Now, this man showed up earlier multiple times in the movie. We're always wondering who he is. This actor was actually a regular in the sort of Martino stable of people. His name is Ivan Rasimov. He's in a bunch of Martino and other people's movies. He's in Cannibal Apocalypse, The House by the Cemetery, Eaten Alive, and Death Smiles on a Murderer.
Really handsome, really intensely good-looking man.
Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, All Colors of the Dark.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's very. He's got those very just
intense
very
eyes.
Intense eyes, especially in All the Colors of the Dark. It's quite a feature in that movie. Another one, great movie we're seeing. And at this point, we find out that Walter, this gray-haired man, is actually Irina's secret lover. And he was her accomplice in the plot to torment and destroy her husband. Now,
he killed Brenda. Yes.
He killed Brenda.
Yes. He typed all the stuff. He brought back the dress from but the most unbelievable thing he did to piss Oliver off was he brought back the dry clean dress. What a piece of shit this guy is.
He's the cleaner.
Seriously.
So he reveals himself to be Irina's secret lover. Okay, first of all, good for her, because Ivan Rasimov is so hot. He's so dark. He's so mysterious. Of course he's going to seduce Irina. Just of course. And then, of course, Floriana runs away with Dario, who comes and gets her on his motorbike. And they are fleeing the villa. She's fleeing all of this nonsense. She has the jewels in her fabulous Gucci backpack. And, and
it's a great scene. It's some great camera work here. Great color.
So Sergio said that they couldn't quite figure out how to kill Floriana. And it was really only in the editing room that they came up with the idea of the motorcycle crash and to align it with the youthful advertising of that billboard. And to Sergio, the idea of the blood and the crash and the fire all ruining that billboard of that perky lady selling something young and beautiful really appealed to him. And he said he saw it recently. He saw it recently, I think, in Amsterdam. And he said he really saw how the scene still worked.
Yeah, it really does. And I love the quick jump cuts to the heart on the billboard and the billboard itself. I love the splatter of blood on the billboard, which logically makes no sense given how they hit the thing and where they're showing blood on their faces. But I don't care because
that makes it even better, Bill. Legitimately, that makes it even better.
Exactly.
And then,
I do not care.
Of course, the signature scene of the trickle of blood running down Floriana's beautiful face. The coup de grace.
And of course, the way this happened was Walter created an oil slick on the road essentially at this turn, which would be very hard to navigate on a motorcycle, which is why they crashed.
I don't know why, but for this whole death scene of Floriana and Dario reminds me of a Roadrunner and a Wile E. Coyote cartoon.
Oh my God. Yes, actually. I had that thought too.
And it just
Do you find it comedic?
Unintentionally, and I just find it's just it's like
it reminds me.
It's a weak ending to her character, but it kind of points to the senselessness of everything that's going on in relationship to these three characters and what's been going on at this villa.
It does remind me of another movie we talked about, which is Danger Diabolic, where they do a lot of this kind of Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner stuff on these curvy roads in Italy. It is just, and that's a social thing from us kind of connecting the two, I think, but it is very funny that it does kind of echo back to the Looney Tunes, Wile E. Coyote cartoons.
Well, of course, cartoons, regardless, this is where we get the payoff of Dario's motorbike competition.
Yes, right. Because now we've established that he is this, we know he's skilled. So obviously,
Right.
like, this wasn't something he would have done without something stopping him, right? So
now Walter has the fabulous bag, his fabulous hair, and he and Irina are now driving around in the fabulous car. And gentlemen, when Irina shows up driving Olivero's fabulous car, I have to say it was just a moment of pure pleasure for me. She looked like such a badass driving whatever it is, the Jaguar or the Ferrari. And she was wearing a flimsy lavender dress. I mean, go ahead, girl.
her hair, by the way, in this movie is fantastic. Can we talk about
All
that
the
real quick?
costumes are fantastic.
That's its own special effect. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No,
Her
the hair in this
eyeliner
movie
is its own special effect.
Now, I do want to just kind of clear some things up, because I do feel like this movie confuses a lot of people, right? And we've figured out, correct me if I'm wrong, that Irina actually had Esther killed as well. Like, the mom of the author was actually the first victim in this chain of events, if I'm correct.
She had Walter kill her. Walter is like her henchman.
So that's like even before the movie starts, this has happened, which really paints everything that happens in this movie in a very different light.
They're all trying to drive each other crazy, which is such, that's a trope of the Gialli that not a lot of people, I think, have talked about. And that is like people being driven to absolute madness. And if you ask me, I think that goes straight back to all of the post-war trauma and the post-fascism trauma, where you would lose your mind from words, from just hearing the propaganda, or, seeing and hearing the way you were manipulated. And the fact that Irina made it her life's mission to torture Olivero to death, I mean, that's disgusting, but it's so fabulous.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that after all that effort, she then pushes him off the same cliff where they had the picnic earlier in the movie. Walter, the man who helped her commit all these murders because they were lovers, now is falling off the cliff.
You guys, he's a total loose end. I mean, come on.
True. Well, and I mean, he's given back the jewelry at this point, so he's really of no use at this point. The irony being the thing that trips Irina up, because you feel like at this point, like, okay, this could be a good for her movie, right? Like, we're all wrapped up, good for her. She's, gotten rid of the abuser. She's gotten rid of the other people that are a problem. There's an alibi for everything. Well, the police are investigating the earlier incident where the rag and bone lady saw her stab the cat. It is interesting to me that the one loose end, the person they overlooked, is the lower class, probably poor person, if not just, maybe working class, but probably lower class woman who's older.
And
who's invisible.
In fact, this woman worked for Esther. She was a maid at the villa when the mom was alive, which just adds to that great Gothic tradition of damning generations.
Yeah. So they're here to investigate animal abuse, none of the murders. And they hear Satan's meowing, much like in the Poe story. They follow the sounds to the cellar, and they find that Satan is making meows from behind the wall. So they start breaking the wall open. And they break the wall open. They find Brenda, they find Oliviero, and they find Satan. Freeze frame on Satan's face, and Fine. Or Fiend? I mean, do you say Fiend with the E? I don't know. Do you pronounce the E?
Well, it's in French, it's fin. Fiend.
Yeah.
Fin. I also just want to point out before we jump off of talking about the film itself, the sound of Satan's meows were, again, just their own character in terms of the audio, like how they echoed and how they sounded especially irritating to Irina. Just the way the cat became a character in this film was so delightful, actually.
Yeah, no, I love the cat in this movie. Some great cat acting in this particular film. And that was Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. Now, not everyone loved this film when it came out, and it definitely had a mixed reception. So let's go to commercials, and we will come back and find out what the Catholics had to say. Welcome back. What did the Catholics have to say? Well, this was a fun one to hunt down because, when you go back this far, I've talked about this before, it becomes harder to find things unless you have access to a print archive or like a good scanned archive of material. What I actually had to do was, first of all, I had to search American archives for, because we did know this one did receive the ire of the Catholic censors. But we weren't sure how to find that information. So I tried searching all the alternative names for the movie, could not find it. Finally, I exhausted my archive options I thought I had. Then what I did, though, was I started looking up what were the Catholic film were there Catholic film journals or papers that would have written about film in Rome or in the Vatican. And it turns out there is Revista del Cinematografo, and it's been around for a long time. But it was one of the primary papers doing these kind of like moralistic reviews of films during this time period. And I managed to find a review, and then I had to like work with Google Translate to translate it. I think I got it. It seems like it makes sense. So I hope this translation is correct. If not, someone correct me. But I mean, good luck finding the original Italian in the first place. It took me a while. So here we go. Here's the review I have from Italy. A story which exploits even the most hackneyed elements of the genre, from doors closing behind the victims to the killer striking while a storm rages, is a blend of artificially heightened emotions without in the process giving the characters any psychological credibility, and unnecessary special effects. All of this is interspersed with erotic displays, both unnatural and natural, by the three protagonists. Now, I have to ask what an unnatural versus a natural erotic display is according to them, because I feel like that's subjective for some people. I think this isn't surprising. We know that critics in the 70s in America as well, Catholic or non-Catholic, kind of looked down on these genre offerings, especially the lower budget ones. What's your reaction to this, Chris?
So when you said
yes,
when I was looking at stuff like an IMDb,
right,
and like when I think of like the quintessential naysayer critic,
right,
Jonathan Rosenbaum's name popped up, and I thought that there was an actual review of Jonathan Rosenbaum doing this film. Alas, it is not true.
Okay.
But like the ultimate naysayer of like negativity, the Chicago Reader's finest, Jonathan Rosenbaum.
Well, and I think, go ahead.
I think that like what's really interesting is like this whole subgenre of essentially horror or thriller has the last laugh on these critics, because these companies like Severin and Blue Arrow and before Anchor Bay and No Shame, Shriek Show, like all these like small independent DVD companies, like they unearthed these films, and now they're being revered. And like Sergio Martino is this guy that like no idea who he is. I mean, we learn about him through Argento, right? And we're like, he's making these movies. In some ways, his films, like his Giallos, are better than Argento's. And that's saying a lot, because I would say that like of this, certain genre, I would say Tenebrae is probably one of my favorites. And that, that film itself has got so much Catholic guilt, repression, symbolism, death. It crosses to, it even takes a transcontinental flight, to tell its tale. But like, it almost reminds me of like underground music from the 70s and 60s. The Velvet Underground, right? Not everybody heard the Velvet Underground, but those
a lot of people didn't.
They went out and they formed bands and they created scenes. And then there was this really amazing exhibit in the city where it was basically it showed the influence of the Velvet Underground, and it showed like the thousands of bands that spawned from the Velvet Underground. And it was
I actually I've got the the I have the gallery catalog from that exhibit in my house.
Yeah, that exhibit was amazing. But like these films are like obviously the three of us it's late at night and we're talking about these. We really enjoy them. We watch them. We've studied. We're not just watching them. We study these films. There's something there. Like we're really like there's some the genre, the motifs, the symbolism, the characters, the subplots, the psychoanalysis. I didn't even bring in like the Lacanian or the theories of Walter Benjamin in relationship to the flaneur or the concept of the city as a crime scene in relationship to the whole Giallo genre. But it's just like you do say, like critics, they're it's going to play a few city,
right?
Who's got the last laugh now? Martino's doing festival across the world.
Screenings that are sold out.
Exactly.
Q&As.
Yeah, and then like Edwige Fenech, she might have gotten most of her variety later in her career in the movie that probably everybody saw unintentionally, didn't realize it was her, was Hostel 2. Yeah, she's the one behind the entire society. She's the one in charge.
Oh yeah,
that's just love from Eli Roth.
It is. Well, I do want to real quick point out something about this review that's interesting is that Italy is highly Catholic, and even their laws there, we think Catholics have influence here in our country. Our evangelicals do, but our Catholics do, and our Catholics absolutely do. I've talked about this before. But in Italy, it's always been like very Catholic influenced on the legal side. And something to know about this movie is it's coming out in 1972. Divorce law allowing a legal framework for divorce does not get introduced in Italy until December 1st, 1970. So you can't, and even then, it's not necessarily true no-fault divorce. So before this in the 60s, divorce was illegal. You could separate legally, but you could not remarry while you were separated. And the general overall societal belief was based in Catholic doctrine, which is that marriage is considered indissoluble. So in the 70s, it does allow dissolution under certain conditions, which are that mutual consent after legal separation of at least 3 years has to occur, or in the case of adultery, abuse, or serious offenses by one spouse. The law in 1970 is very controversial. The Catholic Church is totally against it, which is, again, it's one of those things where you're like, is the church really on the moral high ground here, especially when we talk about adultery, abuse, or serious offenses? In 71, birth control is legalized, somewhat related to this. But the really crazy part is until 1980, if a rapist married his victim, he would not be persecuted under the law, which is kind of insane. Now, it was a punishable offense according to the Penal Code of 1930, but there was something called the Marriage Remedy Clause, which if the rapist married his victim, the prosecution would be completely wiped, completely extinguished. They didn't do away with this until the 1980s. In 1975, they did abolish the rapist marriage clause, and it made it so basically that the crime wouldn't be extinguished. The rape remains a serious crime in this case, with mandatory prosecution regardless of marital status. But I guess there was still some loophole until like 1981, which is when they finally abolish it. So in 81, they make rape a crime to be prosecuted regardless of marital status. I'm not completely sure what the difference is between the 75 and 81 reforms. It does say that my research says that there were some marriage extinguishes crime instances that occurred after 1975. Essentially, the clause continued in the penal code, but there were like just some wordings that allowed people to get away with it, so they could still rape someone and marry them. This is especially a problem, I guess, in the case of sexual assault of minors, or what they called honor crimes. Essentially, the idea was that if you married the person you raped, that you were restoring the woman's honor, which is a disgusting way to think. But that was like the overall like way of thinking at. Basically, it was old patriarchal ideas that were embedded in the law that stated that a woman's honor was considered restored by the marriage. So, like, I guess maybe your virginity is what they're getting at there, but it's pretty messed up to say like you lose your honor because of something that was done to you against your will. But that was the Italian law at the time. So again, this movie is coming out when literally a rapist who married his victim would be not prosecuted for the crime. It gives you a lot more understanding of like how much the audience must have been with Arena while watching this back in the day. Married to this abuser, to this terrible person, regardless of what she does in the movie. I feel like audiences were probably, at least women watching this, were probably very much on her side, given the cultural context and the politics of Italy in this moment. Did you know about that, Stephanie and Chris?
I didn't know anything about this stuff. It brings up the idea that you said that the costume was when she played Mary Stuart, which is one of the wives of Henry VIII, which is basically when, Archbishop of Canterbury, King Henry, we got to figure something out. You can't just keep lopping off your wives' heads.
Right.
So we got to create your own, we got to create your own religion, which brings my background into play, which is the Anglican Church and the Episcopalian. So I didn't know any of this stuff. I know the strict Catholicism element, but then that whole honor thing, totally just blows my mind. That's
it's insane. And it wasn't that long ago. That's right before I was born. Yeah. Like the fact that anyone thought that was okay. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people didn't think it was okay, but again, the Catholic Church had that much influence, but it does bring up the question, the Catholic Church loves to moralize about sex, but then it supports legal things like this in its history where it's saying, if a rapist should marry their victim, essentially, because what else is it's a forced marriage at that point. And if it's like an older man with someone who's a minor, that's disgusting, because that girl or woman probably has no real say in that matter. And the Catholic Church was actively working to stop this from changing. That's profoundly fucked up.
But I will say, all that being equal, and yes, Bill, you and I have discussed this, and it's all sort of shocking just how close in the rearview mirror it is. If you really look at the two women in this film, man, they are as empowered, as badass, and as cold as they come. So let's be very clear here. The leading cause of divorce is marriage. And this is really not a film that is pro anything that you just talked about. And in his own weird way, I love the way Martino's women end up in this film. One of them is dead. The other one has lost her shit. And you know what? Maybe that's the result of their freedoms, because with freedom, you are not guaranteed anything. And these two women made their own decisions, were confident in sacrificing other people's agency for their own purposes. And I love it.
It's a good watch. It was a good one to revisit for sure. Well, let me ask you both. Does this get your imprimatur? Does this get your papal seal of approval? Would you recommend it to someone?
Definitely.
Okay.
And it's like, for me, it's like a springboard. Like, if you love this, you got to check out this one. Like, I feel like, for me, I think my favorite of the is of the Edwige Fenech, like the collaboration is All the Colors of the Dark.
Same.
Yes, that one's amazing.
So much craziness.
Yes,
I mean, you got the thrillers, you got the satanic, the cult going on, you got the witchcraft, you've got what's her name from Death Walks at Midnight and Death Walks, the fashion show. I can't remember the title of it. Death Walks in High Heels. That's it. Yep. I think. Yeah, that's like what these are. They're like, these films are elaborate. We watch them. They're mystery. They're, the characters are, and I think what's interesting is that in a lot of the Fenech films, she plays the heroine or the victim. She's the ingenue. In this one, she's basically the murderess. She does her thing, or she's the manipulator. She does what she does. And it's like against type for her other films.
By the way, you were thinking of Nieves Navarro is the actress who's in All the Colors of the Dark.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, that's how I look at all these films. Is like, they're stylish. The soundtracks are amazing. They're beautifully shot. They have, it's a time capsule too. I mean, these
Right.
movies scream the 1970s. There's even one film where it's the same wallpaper. It's like a white wallpaper with green lines, and you see that exact same room in a different film. I wish I could remember. I think but it might be Bloody Iris as well as Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, or something.
May I speak to that?
Yes.
I am fairly sure that room is seen in your The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward and The Red Queen Kills 7 Times.
Which is a whole other Giallo.
But I will say the reason I think the Martino Fenech trilogy works really well is because Martino is the only director of the genre who effectively captures women's grief. And All the Colors is about a grieving woman. And really, this film is about, in many ways, Irina's grief, how what she had been promised with this marriage and the villa and the money, it was all gone. It was a lie. It was taken away in empty J&B bottles, And
Yes.
That is why I absolutely give it my imprimatur. Not only would I recommend it, I have screened it in public, and I would do it again.
Heck yeah. We should do it together again. That'd be fun.
Woohoo!
And this also gets my imprimatur. I don't think I need to explain that. It's just, it's a great watch. It's a good, it's kind of a deep cut for some people in Giallo, but it really shouldn't be. It's his whole body of work is fantastic. So I recommend people watch it. Again, with the caveat that, going into it, there are these scenes of sexual assault. There is sex and nudity in it, which is typical of a lot of stuff that we cover. But I always warn people specifically about sexual assault, just because for some people it's a non-starter. Not my favorite, but in this film, I feel like it is motivated by the need we have to understand the characters. It may be up to you as to whether or not you feel like it was necessary given the 70s of it all. And on that note, that about wraps it up for this episode of Morally Offensive. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. This is huge. It takes like a second, but any platform you use, Apple Music, Spotify, whatever, please rate, review, and subscribe. It moves us up in the search results and allows more people to find us, especially from like-minded podcasts. We love finding other people who are kind of on the same wavelength and into the same nerdy stuff. Please, Chris, before we leave real quick, I would like to ask you, how can people find you? Do you want people to find you? Do you care?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do have my own podcast on Spotify. It is called The Chamber with Christopher Hoppe. Incidentally, my very first episode was done a couple years ago, and it was a deep dive into Giallo January.
Well, yeah, you got to plug that, man. Come on.
Yeah. So, yeah.
He says the Chamber with Christopher Hoppe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely go to your favorite podcast provider and look up The Chamber with Christopher Hoppe. I'm going to dig in tomorrow. That sounds great. Chris, thank you again so much. This was awesome. It was great to do this so soon after the last one, but I'm glad you reached out to me. I didn't know who to ask to do this. It's such a kind of a deep cut pick. I'm worried about what our stats will look like on this episode. I think people are going to be a little bit like,
this one's
what are we doing?
This one's for the film geek.
It's
this one really is like, this is really for like the serious, like, genre specific, kind of that. But no, thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you all a wonderful.
Thank you. And I will say, the film itself is not just for film geeks, but it is one that, like, the kind of people who will know about it beforehand are those people. But I think anybody would enjoy this who enjoys like really well shot, vibey horror, especially from Italy in the 1970s. Please join us again in 2 weeks when Cisco and I will be revisiting a 90s action film based off a video game IP in preparation for the release of its latest incarnation. I am, of course, talking about Mortal Kombat! Thanks for listening, and as always,
go and sin no more.